Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to TSK Tutorials, and this is RZtuts 2, 3 of 5. So, this is my third video of 5 videos. In the video playlist, it's going to be going over how to teach you guys how to create the most badass bullets inside of Unity3D. So, in this episode, we are going to be going over how to add damage to the bullets, or by damage, I mean basically just depleting a variable inside of any particular script, and we can define that script within our code. Typically, this script is going to either be the enemy script or the player script. So basically, we're going to be able to use the exact same bullets for the enemies and the player, and then we're basically just going to have a Boolean variable that we can change inside of the inspector to determine whether or not we're going to apply damage to the player or whether we are going to apply damage to the enemy. And then basically what the script is going to do is it's just going to drop a variable down, which is either going to be the enemy health or player health. But within the enemy health, we are also going to add the modification of a damage body part multiplier. So basically what we're going to do is for the enemy's body, we're going to, for whatever part of the body, whether it's the head, torso, arms, legs, hands, however complicated you want to make it, we're going to have a script and a rigid body and a collider. Oh wait, no, not for this particular episode, we're not going to have a rigid body. But either way, we're going to have a collider and its own script. So that way we can add what I'm going to be calling the damage multiplier. But basically this is going to be a number in which we are going to multiply the damage depending on which part of the body that you hit. So for example, the head you might want to make times 10, or the torso times 2, or the arm times 0.5. So basically, depending on what part of the body you hit, you are going to multiplicationally make more damage for that particular body part. I think that is everything that we're going to be going over today. We're only going to be doing the damage multiplier for the enemy AI, since our player, as of right now, is just a capsule. But you can still apply this technique to adding a damage multiplier to the player, depending on how complicated you want to make your player. But because in my game, the player is just a simple capsule, we're not going to add that to the player. We're just going to do the damage multiplier to the enemy, because that's really where it's going to count, because the players are going to try to go for headshots, and you really want to reward them for getting that headshot and kill that enemy in 1 hit or 2 hits, or however you want to set up your game. So that is what we're going to be going over in this episode. So why don't I cut the camera and go into screen recording and show you guys how to do this inside of Unity. Alright, here we are inside of Unity. Now, why don't we actually make it so these bullets apply damage to the enemies and add force to the enemies? I guess we're going to clump that into this episode too. But yes, why don't I open up our new bullet script and actually figure out what changes we need to make. So let's first of all, let's start with the variables. And I'm just looking over at my cheat sheet over here, and I don't think there are any actual variables that we need to add. We don't need to change anything inside of function awake. Let's see, we only need to change, let me just look over here. There's really, okay, there's really nothing else we need to change besides going into right here. I think this is, yep, this is where we are going to do this. So we are inside of the for loop that is checking for all of the hits that the raycast found. So as we go through all of them right now, we are only checking to see if those hits have a tag of level parts right here. So now we need to check for other tags. And the first tag we are going to check for is enemy body part. Oh, wait, nope. There is one variable that we do need to add. And that is damage to player. Or is that what I called it? Damage? No, damage player. So var damage player. Nope, not play. Player. And this is a Boolean. And we're going to by default have it equal false. So Basically, now we have a variable that inside of the inspector we can check on or off depending on whether or not we want this bullet to be an enemy bullet or a player bullet. So basically, if we want it to be an enemy bullet, we set damage player to true, and then it will damage the player and therefore be an enemy bullet. So we're going to create an if statement down here that says if hit.transform form.tag equals enemy body part, not party, wow, okay, enemy body part, and where's my and symbol? There it is. And damage player equals false. Okay, so now we have an if statement that is only going to call true if our bullet hits an enemy or an enemy body part, because we're going to have multiple colliders on our enemies that are going to basically determine which part of the body we hit. So whether it's the hand or foot or head or torso, it's going to be an enemy body part. And then we know that damage player is false. So this is a bullet that is meant to just add damage to the enemies and is a bullet that came from the player. So in this case, we are going to do hit, so hit.transform get component, and then we're going to get the enemy body part script, which I will show you what the enemy body part, actually let's go to the enemy body part script. It's over here. So the enemy body part script is very, very simple. So we have var enemy body, and this is a game object. So this is going to keep track of our enemy body, and basically enemy body is just a game object that is pretty much just our enemy. If you follow the FPS 1 tutorials, you'll probably have a better idea of what the enemy body part is. But in case you haven't watched those tutorials, just know that the enemy body is basically just the enemy, and the main script of the enemy is attached to that. And most importantly, the variable health is inside of enemy body. And what happens when that variable reaches 0 is it will turn all of the enemy body parts into, or it will activate their rigid bodies, and then you get the ragdoll effect. And once again, that was gone over in the FPS 1 tutorials. So depending on however you want your enemy to die, whether you want it to be a ragdoll or fall into pieces like in Robot Zombies, you just need to know that it's the variable health, and it's actually enemy health is what I called it. And if it is smaller than or equal to 0, it activates all of the rigid bodies. So, and then we have a variable called add force vector and damage multiplier. So let's start with add force vector. Add force vector is going to be a vector 3 that basically is just the direction and force. So basically just the force in the form of vector 3 that we're going to add to this body part, and we're going to save it inside of the add force vector, and then it's going to hold on to that and then wait until the rigid body has been activated, and then is going to add force to the rigid body, and therefore you get the ragdoll effect, and then the bullets will actually affect your ragdoll and or just pieces that have fallen apart off of your robot. And then we have the variable damage multiplier. And by default, I have this set to 1. And if you have it set to 1, then the enemy body dot enemy health, or not enemy body, it's actually enemy body dot get component enemy body script dot enemy health. But anyways, the variable health will just deplete by the amount of damage that you specified inside of your bullet. But if you have it say set to 2, then it's going to do twice what you specified in your bullet. So that going back is, oh man, I'm just totally, we need another variable, damage. And this is going to be a float, and let's by default just have it set to, I don't know, 5. So this variable here we're going to use to determine how much we are going to deplete away from the variable enemy health. And if we have this variable here, damage multiplier, set to 2, it's going to take away 10 because we have this variable set to 5. But of course, we can change this for all of the different bullet types so that you can make your guns more or less powerful, so you can balance all your guns and make them work nice and well. All right, so now that we've gone over all of the variables inside of the enemy body part script, let's take a look at what we're going to be putting inside of function update. So if add force vector does not equal vector3.0, so by default, if you don't define what the vector3 is going to be, it's going to by default just be vector3.0 or 0, 0, 0. And so if it doesn't equal that, then we know that we have gone through this script and we have actually added a vector3 and saved it inside of the add force vector, and that we want to add force to that enemy body part. And then the second condition inside of this if statement is if enemy body.getComponent enemy body script.enemy health is smaller than or equal to 0. So basically this whole long line might be different in your game. Depending on where your enemy health variable is, or whatever you called your variable that is the health of your enemy. So basically this is just a way of getting to that variable. So depending on how your game is set up and how your scripts are set up, this might be different for you. So just know that we are just using that as a way of getting to the variable enemy health. And then we are checking to see if that variable is smaller than or equal to 0. And if that is the case, then we know that the rigid bodies have been activated by the enemy body script, which is this script here. So then we know the rigid bodies have been activated. And then add force vector, it does not equal 0. So we know there is a force to add. So we know that we are ready to add some force to the enemy body part. So let's take a look at the first thing, which is if rigid body. So basically we have an if statement and an else statement, depending on whether or not you have the rigid body attached to your enemy body parts, or if, say, your enemy is just one big rigid body. It can go either way, just depending on how you have it set up in your hierarchy. This is kind of just like a extra way of just making sure that the force is added to your rigid body, regardless of how it's set up in the hierarchy, or at least mostly however it's set up in the hierarchy. So if we have a rigid body, we're going to do rigidbody.addForce, add force vector. So this is going to be in the case that we have the rigid body attached to the game object that this whole script is attached to. And then if that is not the case, then we're going to assume that there's a rigid body attached to the parent of this game object. And maybe you have a child with just a different collider on it. So maybe you just want to have multiple colliders so that you can get more accurate hit readings from the bullets, so that your colliders match up with the mesh of your enemy, so that you can get more accurate shots on your enemy. So we're going to do transform.parent.rigidbody.addForce, add force vector. So those are pretty close to the same thing. It just depends on which rigid body or where the rigid body is located. And then after that, we're going to do add force vector equal vector3.0. So then it is now in a state of waiting to get another hit, so that if the dead body is on the ground, you can still shoot it and still make it move when you actually shoot it with a bullet. Okay, now let's go back to the new bullet script, or just the bullet script in general. So we have our two variables, which I thought that we didn't need because I didn't have them over here on my cheat sheets. So, oh wait, no, I did have them on my cheat sheet. I just didn't see them. Okay, whatever. And now we need to go back down here because we have an unfinished line of code. So we would be getting an error because I did save this. But anyways, that's just completely beside the point. So, so first we have an if statement that checks to see if it has the tag of enemy body part. So if it has the tag of enemy body part, we're going to know that this script is attached to it. So then we're going to go down here. Oh, also, and we are not damaging the player. So we know that this is a player bullet. So we're looking at damaging the enemy. So we know that. So we know that the enemy body part script is going to be attached to the game object that has this tag. So we're going to do hit .transform.getComponent enemy body part script dot let me look over dot enemy body dot get component enemy body script, I believe, is what I'm going to be using. And then dot enemy health minus equal damage times, and I'm just going to copy and paste this. This is taking too long. So Control C and then Control V. Okay. So basically, oops, there's a space here. We don't need that space. So this whole gigantic long line of code is basically just getting to the enemy health variable so that we can take away from it. So to get to it, we have hit. So this is the raycast hit variable that is a result of our raycast up here. And dot transform is the transform of the game object that this raycast hit hits. And then we are going to get the components enemy body part script from that. And then inside of the enemy body part script, we have the variable enemy body so that we know what game object is holding the variable enemy health. And then we are going to get the component enemy body part script because that's where the enemy health variable is located inside of. And then we are going to pull out enemy health. And then we are going to do minus equal to deplete from that. And then what we are going to deplete from the variable enemy health is damage times hit.transform.getComponent enemy body part script .damage multiplier. So once again, it's just the raycast hit variable that we got from our raycast up here. And then we're accessing the transform, and then we are going to get components enemy body part script and then damage multiplier because damage multiplier is in this script right here. And so then that is all that we need to do to actually get, lost my train of thought, to actually take away damage from the enemy health. And then after that, we need to save the variable. Actually, I'm just going to copy and paste again. So highlight, copy, back over here, delete that S, and paste. So we're going to set the variable shortest so far equal vector3.distance transform.position.hit point. And then when we take the variable shortest so far, let's see, where do we check for the variable shortest so far? I guess we only check it up here. So I guess this is just going to add to the checking of this when we are going to check for the variable shortest so far. So it just kind of gets mixed in with this whole equation that is inside of this for loop. So I guess the only problem with this script is if you do end up hitting an enemy, you can kind of shoot them through the wall. So I wonder if there's actually a way that we can make this better. I don't know. I can't really wing it. So it's not really that big of a deal, honestly. And then we're going to set the variable found hit to equal true. And then down here is once we get the found hit, actually the way this is set up, I think it's actually going to start spawning bullets floating in the air. So I'm going to create an if statement right here. It says, actually, no, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this if parent to add, and I'm just going to move it right there, and then delete the old one. And then clean it up a little bit. Just like that. Okay, so now we will only spawn a bullet if we actually have the variable parent to add. And then that way we won't spawn bullets on the enemy body as the enemy is moving around. But if we actually do want bullets to appear on, or bullet holes to appear on our enemy, we should actually put right here parent. Actually, I think I can do this. I can just copy it, and paste. And now we have the variable parent to add equal hit dot transform, and then it is saved inside of here, and then we will actually put a bullet hole on the enemy. But I'm not entirely sure that that is going to look good, because there's going to be since we're using hitboxes, the bullet hole is going to be floating above our enemy a little bit, but depending on your game, you might want to put that in there. But for robot zombies, I'm not going to use that, because I think that it'll look weird and the bullet holes will just be floating above the skin, I guess, or the surface of the robots. So I think that would just look kind of bad. So I'm going to leave that line out there. But depending on your game, like if your hitboxes are really close to your enemy, or maybe you want to do different bullet holes, like maybe you want to have like a bloody bullet hole or something like that, you can do that, and that would just be where you would want that line of code. Okay, so the next thing, we want to add damage to the player. So I'm just going to copy and paste this, and then I'm going to put it right here, and I'm going to highlight all this, and I believe Control Alt Home there. Okay, sweet. So basically it's going to be like the exact same thing up here, except the complete opposite. So we're going to check for the tag, and if the tag is player and damage to player is true, then we know that we are shooting a bullet at the player that is from an enemy. So the first condition is if both of these conditions are true. I mean, the first line of code, if those two conditions are true, are hit.transform.getComponents player movement script .health minus equal damage. So pretty straightforward. The raycast hit variable, we're going to access the transform through that so that we can access the function get component, and then we're going to get the component player movement script because the player's health is inside of the player movement script, and we're just going to minus equal damage. And we're not going to really worry in this case about the damage multiplier, because right now the player is just a player capsule, and it's going to be so much less noticeable if the player gets hit in the head and the foot and get damaged different amounts. Whereas if you're shooting an enemy and you get a headshot, you want to reward the player for getting that headshot. So it's really not as big of a deal for the player to have a damage multiplier in different body parts. You're really not going to notice. Unless you just want to add that extreme amount of detail into your game, you can use the same technique as you have up here, but then you'd have to put a bunch of hitboxes on your player. So, that's up to you if you want to make your game that advanced. And then once again, we're having shortest dist so far, just like we have up here. I believe that's like the exact same line of code. We're just adding to this whole equation inside of the for loop just to make sure that we are finding the shortest distance so far, and then found hit equal true. And then we're not going to use parent to add because it doesn't matter at all if we get bullet holes on the player, because you'll never see your own body inside of a first-person shooter. So we're definitely going to leave that line of code out inside of this if statement so that we don't get any bullet holes inside of this little if statement down here. So I believe, okay, that's everything that I have inside of my cheat sheet, but I didn't actually go over the add force vector, but we're going to be doing that in the next episode. We're going to make it so that we add force to the actual enemy body parts and any objects with rigid bodies in our scene. So we'll do that in the next episode. It's really not too hard, I don't think. So yeah, why don't we go inside of Unity and see if it worked? So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out an enemy just to show you. So let's find where I saved my enemy. So I believe, oh, here, it's inside of this folder, robot zombie enemy. Perfect. So I'm going to drag and drop them right here, and you can already see the hitboxes and where they are located. So we have a couple of spheres. The bigger sphere is for melee, the smaller sphere is for navigation, and then all of the boxes are for the rigid bodies and detecting whether or which part of the body you actually hit. So let's click on, let's find his head, and I will use that. So it's a child of the body, head, there we go. Okay, so basically this giant hierarchy of, or I mean not hierarchy, well I guess it is a hierarchy, but it's a hierarchy inside of the hierarchy. So what I mean is a hierarchy of bones. So this is, let's see, I guess this starting here is the actual model, or wait, no, where's the skinned mesh renderer? Here it goes. So I guess it starts from here, and then so it starts from here, and then these are all of the different bones of the different body parts. So if you know anything about animating, you'll know that you get different bones, and it, like, let's see, if I go here and I turned off the skinned mesh render, all those bones are still there, and the bones are just a way of guiding the skinned mesh renderer into the area of the bones and where the bones want to be, depending on the animation. So if we take, for example, head, so just remember that this isn't actually, this mesh is guided into head. It isn't actually attached to the game object that is head. So you can see there's no mesh right here. The actual mesh is the skinned mesh renderer. So let's go back to the head, and you can see I have a box collider, and basically I just added a component, box collider, and then I have all of these 6 variables. I just kept on tweaking them and adjusting them until I got a box that just tightly fit around the robot's head. And then we have a rigid body with use gravity set to false and is kinematic set to false, and then the enemy body part script. And as you can see on the head, I have damage multiplier set to 3. The enemy body is selected to this game object up here, and then our add force vector. We actually don't, we could just hide this in the inspector, but actually, screw it, I will do that right now. So I'm going to go enemy body part, add force vector, at hide in inspector. Now you might be thinking, oh, why don't you just write private var inside of add force vector? I'm actually not sure if that would work. I think maybe if you write public or private, I always get it mixed up which is which, but I like to use at hide in inspector because I know that all this does is hide it in the inspector. It won't affect how the variable is able to be used. And because this is an important variable that is going to be used in all, or in this script, like this script needs to access and modify add force vector, but at the same time, we don't want to see add force vector inside of the inspector. So I just use at hide inspector because I know it works every time. And I don't know, that's just what I'm currently using. I like that technique. It seems to work well. But yes, let's see if there's anything else I really need to go over before we just simply playtest it. Yeah, why don't I delete this guy and let's give the game a run. But I'm going to go from the temp main menu so that I can choose the checkpoint that I want to play from. And I want to use checkpoint 3. So yeah, I'm going to cut the video while it's actually loading. Okay, here we are. The game has loaded, and I have the wrong gun. So I'm going to hop down here because I know there's a shotgun over here. Yes, there is that a shotgun? Yes. So this is our working gun. This is the one that we've been modifying and creating. So let's go find some robot zombie enemies and see if we can shoot them to death. And there should be one popping around the corner right there. Yeah, there's a bunch of them. So actually, I don't even, yep, it's working. So, let's try to get a headshot and not die. Headshot, 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 headshot. Nah, that wasn't a headshot, but I still killed him. And he just killed me. Alright, well, it looks like the script is definitely working. So, yes, I guess in the next episode, we will make it so that these bullets will actually add some force to the rigid bodies in our scene. So that will be really cool. And I really like when you can, like, shoot objects in games like I believe Half-Life 2 was the first game to, like, really utilize that. Like, I don't know if it's the first game ever to do that, but I really like that effect, and it just really makes you feel like the world is really real when there's rigid bodies that can move and you can interact with them by shooting them and moving into them. So yes, that's what we're going to be going over in the next episode. So I guess until my next episode, I'll see you guys later, and keep making games.